Welcome to Direct Supply's Continuing Education webinar series. Direct Supply offers monthly webinars on a variety of topics throughout the year. The topic for today is bullying, not just on the playground anymore. My name is Robin Malik, and I will be facilitating today's meeting. Please note, the information contained in this presentation is intended to provide general information, but not advice about certain regulations and initiatives. This is not intended as legal or other advice, and each situation may vary depending on the particular facts and circumstances. You should not act upon this information without first consulting with qualified legal counsel. Today we are joined by Ray Miller. Ray is the Director of Risk and Safety Solutions for Direct Supply. He guides the development and implementation of resident and employee safety, risk management, and loss prevention programs. Ray leads the Direct Supply Loss Prevention Forum, a network and community of risk and safety professionals in the senior living industry. Ray also provides education, training, and insight for senior living providers at all levels of roles within a long-term care community. He is a regular speaker at many national and state long-term care corporations and conventions. And now, please welcome Ray.
Hi, everybody. Appreciate you taking some time. And we're going to talk about bullying. We've all got some experience with it, whether we've been bullied or, sorry to say this, we are the bully. Maybe we're not bullied 24/7, but some of us have that tendency. Now, the title that you're looking at is a solid title for a description, but I'd like to add one on to it, okay? And this is really from the resident's perspective. And that's to live with hope and gratitude each day. When you take a look at your residents, as you tour your buildings, you give care, all of those kinds of things, I'm hoping that you see the look of hope in your residents' eyes, in their face, perhaps a smile once in a while. Those kinds of things that make such a big difference. All right, now that picture we used, that picture of those two people, I'm going to replace with this picture. And I use this picture a lot because I think in our industry, we're always keyed in on the fact that we're supporting our residents. But I would ask you, have you ever held hands like that, and who was supporting who? Who has the ability to support who? And I think we both realize that that caregiver is the one with the hands on the bottom. But the residents coming from the top, and they can pull you up too, and they can encourage you, and it can feel good to work with them. And that's a lot of what we're gonna focus on today, is how do we work together? So here's not only our learning objectives, but our agenda for the day. So we'll start out with some definitions. Question for you. Now, it's not one you can answer, so I'll have to provide an answer. Give me an extreme example of a bullying situation, the most extreme you've seen. And then we'll go through the room, if it's at a convention or at a corporate meeting, and we'll have some sharing. And there are different versions. Some of it's at dining, some of it's in the van seating, all of those different kinds of things. This is one that's from 2014 down in Texas. Police say nursing home resident killed 2 with arm of a wheelchair. Mr. Jones had been scared of Mr. Red, his roommate, soon after they met. The 77-year-old man pleaded with his daughter as recently as the day of the event to, quote, get Red out of this room. The two shared this room with 2 other residents. So we already know we've got some cause for tension in there. We've got 4 people sharing this space, and it's not that long ago. Red hopefully made aggressive threats, bullied his roommates, and appeared mentally unstable. Obviously, the word wasn't hopefully, it was frequently. My daughter, is there any way we can please move this person out of the room? Sarah Jones said her father asked her that day. That same night, her father and another roommate were dead, killed, police said, when Red beat them with the wheelchair armrest. Now, you've got to admit, that is about as extreme as it gets. But does it take extreme bullying to be unacceptable? And there's lots of situations we've seen where it's verbal. It might be in the dining room. It might be the volume of the TV, all those different kinds of things. Well, I guess there would be another question for you to think about, too. And it's probably in your mind. How did this happen? Why did this happen? or the thought, it wouldn't happen in my facility, it wouldn't happen in my community, it surely wouldn't happen with my staff. And you're probably right. But to what level are we preventing the bullying? How are we comforting our residents? How are we working with them? Let's talk about a definition for bullying itself. How would we start that out? Going through rooms, many rooms, different times, it's always somebody's picking on another person, something like that. We can even take it further than that, though, because, when you think about it, it's not a single event. It's this pattern that gets created. And there's this obvious intent on the part of the bully. They want a reaction. Okay, but that bully might be part of a group, a cluster. Maybe they might be the leader and others will follow, but it can be groups as well, especially in, again, a seating situation in a dining room. And there's seldom, the bully's seldom going to try to comfort. It's always going to be to make the other person uncomfortable. And many, many times there's an imbalance of power. Now, when I say imbalance of power, I don't want anybody to think that it's the largest person in the room, because that's not necessary. Think of one of the greatest bullies that ever existed. He used to keep his hand crossed inside of his coat, his military coat, right above his belly button. And that was Napoleon. Little bitty guy. And if I say somebody's short, trust me, they're short. Okay? So it's not size. It's this presence. It's this personality. But I got to ask you, too. Is there a difference between bullying and having a bad day? And just as an example, Nancy and I get admitted to your facility. And, I hope it never happens. I hope it's me first. But if something happens to Nancy, trust me, I'm going to have a lot of bad days. There's going to be aches and pains inside of me that I'll have no way of escaping. And I'll need some help there. But that doesn't mean I'm being a bully, even if some of my behaviors seem like it. Why do they exist? Why are there bullies today? Well, we'll look at three possible areas, all right? There's a need. A need? What kind of a need? Many of the people on this phone are used to having control of things, being in charge of things, whether it's your department, whether it's your facility, whether it's finance, whether it's the care, maybe it's the education, all those different kinds of things where we have something that we're in charge of. So now those residents come to live with you. As soon as I walk in the door, I'm going to begin to lose choice. Somebody else is going to start making choices for me. And I'm going to feel those, and you'll probably get some sort of a response to that, because there's this loss of control. Now, keep in mind, too, that sometimes that quote-unquote loss is more perceived than actual. It's something that I sense that isn't necessarily intended. I had somebody come up to me at the end of a presentation, and it was actually a resident that came up, and she said, the management here is a bully. And I said, tell me about it. And she said that they had to eat in groups, in shifts, if you would, and that they were having pork chops one day. And she told me how much she loves pork chops, but she was eating in the third group. And she said by the time she got her pork chop, it was dry and it was tough and it wasn't enjoyable anymore. And she repeated, management here is a bully. There was no bullying intention, but nonetheless, there was the perception. And so when we think about how it's going to be manifested and why it's going to be manifested, because we really need to dig in at times and figure out why they've got these behaviors. It can be that of dominance. We sort of already talked about that one. It can be retribution. They're plain and simple. They're going to get even with somebody for how they treated them. It might be jealousy. I mean, I've seen situations where one resident had lots of family visits. Other residents around him became jealous because of that. We'll talk about the solution later on, but it was real, and it became a big issue. Sometimes it's an internal thing. They need some counseling. They need some assistance. They're going to need to talk to somebody, and it could just plain and simple be fear. Fear generated by all different kinds of things. All right, so have you ever witnessed bullying? My sense is you probably have, okay? And how frequent is that? It's not new to you. There's plenty of those kinds of things. Well, let's think about this. And I'm going to give you some results of studies, but here's a result of a quick study. And you can have this study in your own community if you wanted to. Those under 80 are more likely to bully than those over 80. And when you think of physical limitations and all of those kinds of things that have to be dealt with as you continue your old frailty, different kinds of disabilities, you just don't have the wherewithal to be a bully anymore. At some point, you go beyond that point. So how many people are bullied? There's studies all over the map. The 1 in 5, that's pretty much 10%. That's the result from one study. Then you see that 10 to 20%. Well, that's still a lot of residents. What about the study that showed 46% of nursing home residents report being bullied, at least to some degree? And so when I struggle through that and I read the studies and I try to come up with it, I notice that there's a difference in the definitions of bullying. And so we don't have this common standard. And even if we have a common standard, the application of something like that can just be perceived as different on the part of the caregiver that's giving the opinions. So let's talk about how do we identify the impact of bullying, because there's plenty of impacts. What's unique about the elders' bullying? If it were on the playground, I could go back into the school. I could go over to the other side of the playground. I could go to another group of friends. There's lots of places I could go. Well, where can your residents go when they live right where that threat exists, especially if it's somebody with the intent to seek them out? And we're going to be in shared spaces. We'll talk about shared spaces. And they don't have too many sanctuaries. They can go back to their room, but pretty soon we become concerned because it's as if they're withdrawing from the activities, from communal dining, from all of those kinds of things that just help to build them up and sustain them. But they also have this reduced ability to cope. And when we think about their aging process, psychological, environmental stressors become real to them. They become so real. Change their room for some reason. You have to change their room. That's going to be an environmental, but also a psychological stress. So I'm going to show you a picture. Now, you'll always find me picking on the men first before I say anything about the women. And I picked this picture for a very real reason. Years ago, it was the late 90s, we had a man who walked with a cane. He had been in his own room for probably several weeks now because his companion, his roommate, had left. So he got used to living by himself. Well, we admitted somebody else. They came into that room, so there was some stress there to begin with, because we quickly get used to that, to having the whole space to ourselves. So I had to begin to share the space. Well, the man who walked with the cane kept telling his new roommate, don't swear, because the man did swear. And we were listening, and we heard these grunts and his groans and his steady statement, I told you not to swear, and the man with the cane was beating an other man as he laid in his bed. And so when I saw this man with the cane, it just pulled me back. I hearkened back to an experience I had had before. We'll see some of that happening as to why people bully others too. They're really reacting to an old experience, not to the current experience. Well, when we think about what differentiates the men bullies from the women bullies, let's take a look at how we can describe the men bullies. They're very direct. Can be very spontaneous, very quick to react. I mean, it's just like impatience. It just pops so quickly. More verbal aggression, but there's also be some physical aggression with them as well. And you know what? If you admit a husband and a wife, there's time that one of them will know best what the other one needs. And so they'll be quite bossy with their mate. And, men tend not to they tend not to be in clusters and in groups. But then there's also the protectiveness that I mentioned. I had a recent interview, and it was with a family situation, and one member of the family was bullying the other member of the family, and the situation deteriorated into conversation and trying to get them to realize the fact that all of their explanations were, well, it's because of John and the way he acts, and that's just the way I feel, and all of those, because it's getting that bully to realize that what they're doing is unacceptable. I was once told in a presentation, it's my opinion and it should be yours, and I kind of like that. I guess there's a bullying tendency in me. How about women that bully? All right, again, I'm going to give you a picture in the top right-hand corner. You ready? There it is. And to me, she looks like a bully. I don't know what bullies really look like, okay? I'm prejudging. But here are some things that we tend to see. That third one down, the hen table. I was working for a short period of time in an assisted living over in Ohio, It was a large CCRC campus, and I was helping to serve lunch. And there was a table in the one corner, and there was a group of men sitting there. And if there's a hen table, there's also a rooster's tree, too, because they were making fun of everybody. So I came back to help serve dinner, and sure enough, same men sitting there with the same kind of comments. So it didn't really change. There tends to be a leader. There tends to be followers. And they tend to be really passive aggressive, and they kind of worm in, and manipulation of emotions, you bet, and they're pretty good at it. But they can do it with staff too. It isn't just on the residents, but today's presentation is really resident bullying. So what do they look like? What do these situations look like? Here's one. And if I asked you to pick out who the bully was, I had this presentation over in Ohio last week. And so we put this picture up there, and I asked them, who's the bully? Well, they point at that little man sitting there on the table. I honestly think it's perhaps his wife, and he's just trying to eat as quick as he can to get out of that room and get back to a safer place. But we don't know what they look like, so we better look for situations. Here's another kind of a situation that it can be. What might be the most desired table? Maybe it's that table most shielded from the wind, tucked back in, right there at the close bottom left-hand corner of the picture. But it might be, on a nicer day, it might be that right-hand table, because it has greater perspective, greater viewing. But you know, something else that I notice at that table is the fact that it's very crowded, which we're going to have Jeanna speak at the end of this about seating options and how crowding can be a cause of bullying. But some of those people decided they wanted to sit at that table. Maybe we need a larger table, those kinds of things. But we'll talk more about that whenever we get into that section of the presentation. So common triggers for bullying: shared resources. Maybe it's the pool table. Maybe it's the seating in the van. Maybe it is the dining room area. It could be so many different spaces. So it is shared services, but it also can be the staff not engaging or not being present. They're just not really emotionally involved and engaged. They're there to do the job, but that they're not doing anything else. They're not really participating emotionally with the residents. So here's some of those areas. You've probably seen all of them. Well, let me ask you this question. What aspects are your residents willing to argue over? Why would they bully somebody? Maybe it's because they're too short, too tall, too thin, too large, too hairy, too bald, too new, they've been here too long, they smell, all those different kinds of reasons. Those and many more. They can find lots of reasons to argue over it. How about somebody that's a new move-in? Okay? A new move-in. Why? Well, in some instances, they are brand new to an institutionalized care setting, and they really don't know how to react. They tend to be they tend to be trusting until they know otherwise, but it could be that divorced or that widowed person who's just left on their own. Family may or may not be able to visit, but the reality is they don't really know what to expect. They don't know what to expect. So the kinds of things we tend to watch for when we're watching for depression, or when we're watching for bullying, is they're becoming depressed. Those kinds of issues that become more and more dependent on the staff, more clingy on the staff. But the reality is, we wouldn't know changes in a new person because we don't know what they were before. So we're left with that reality that we're just going to have to watch closely for them. Now, sometimes we can back up and we can talk to the families. But a few months later, after this person is no longer new, you will probably know more about the residents than the staff does, and that's important to hold on to. So what about the impacts that we're going to see? Okay, because clearly here's a staff member. Okay, what kind of challenges do they have? Well, we think about the workload that they bear under, and then especially on a night that they have to work short. Or we've got some new admissions going on. All those kinds of things that increase the burdens. Again, we go back to the fact that in certain resident cultures, the staff, especially if they're of that same culture, will know their place and they will stay back a little bit. and they won't engage. They won't become part of that. And sometimes there's this denial, even to the degree that there will be times when we give someone a private room because of their bad behaviors at the same price. And there's just this denial on our part, and it's all, well, that's just the way Mr. Jones is, and we have to put up with it. But then there's also that elder who is the authority figure. So depending, you may see the staff back away. Everybody knows this person. It's Robin Williams. And he made a quote once, and I saw this quote in somebody else's presentation, a keynote speaker down in Las Vegas once, and it was a healthcare association. And when I saw it, I decided I'm going to use that. He said, I used to think that the worst thing in the world was to end up alone. It's not. The worst thing in the world, the worst thing in life, is to end up with people that make you feel all alone. And so when we think of that, you think of Robin Williams, wow, famous, rich, wealthy. Wow, I wonder what he looks like on the inside. Would it be something like that? Because we all know what happened to Robin Williams. Or would it be something more like that? And there are times when we need to try to figure out what's going on inside of that resident. What's causing these behaviors? Because the reality is, until we can understand the cause, it's going to be harder to intervene. Because your interventions need to be wrapped around the needs of that resident. So what do the consequences look like? That's one of them. In my mind, and I've treated this so many times as an emotional contracture. You can just sort of see her caving in. Shoulders begin to droop, arms come closer together, her head lowers even further. She participates less. She's no longer going down for congregate dining. She's not participating in bingo, even though it used to be one of her favorite activities. Well, that's not the only person for whom there will be consequence. We'll see the bystanders, we'll see the facility, and of course we'll see the residents. So what the bystander consequence look like? Let's think about it. How about fear? How about anger? How about losses? All right, in terms of who's next? Me, my mom, that bystander could be a family member. And they're seeing this go on. I mean, my mom's 87 years old. At some point, she may come to live in a setting where you will be caring for her, or somebody like you. We come in, we see bullying across somewhere in the dining room, and what's our thought? What's happening to Mom when we're not here? And then those trailing thoughts. Do you even care? What are you doing to stop this? What programs, what policies, what procedures, what training? How are you equipping your residents? And the kinds of losses? We feel these in our own lives, based on the pressures we're under at the time, based on the relationships we have or don't have. And these are the kinds of losses that are really hard to replace. What about facility consequence? Think about that. Is it just a toxic living environment for the resident, or is it more and more difficult for the staff as well? What happens to your census? What happens to morale? Because we all know what happens when morale drops. Many other performance measurements drop as well. And then you start having more authorities coming back in, ombudsmen, surveyors, all those different kinds of things begin to happen. Now what happens to your reputation in the community? So those are a few of the kinds of consequence for the facility. What about resident consequence? Well, this is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And you see that one right there at the top, self-actualization? If you and I have ever had the opportunity to share a conference room or even just participate in this phone call, you know that I like to talk. You know that I like to present. I consider myself to be an educator of sorts. So what happens when I come to your community? What happens to my opportunities to be a presenter, to be an educator, to be a participant? So those begin to go away. Now, I'm not saying that to live at the point where I live in the range of esteem. That's good too. But that's something many times that's given to someone. I'm still that kind of a person who wants to give back. So my question to you is, do you have some sort of a new resident welcoming committee? Many facilities do, and if you don't, many communities do. And if you don't, it might be something to give some thought to. Because you know what? Put me on that committee. Let me participate in that committee. And I jokingly say, I'll even talk about your trash cans, okay? I mean, I'll talk about flammability standards and whatever it is, I will. But help me. Help me to maintain the status as high as I can. Because, you know, if all we're interested is the physiological needs, that bottom layer, I could be a dog in a cage, and those needs could be met. I have a place to sleep, food to eat, water to drink, and a place to defecate and urinate. My needs are met. And we don't even want to think about that being the only kinds of needs that are being met for our residents. So let's think about a resident. Let's go back to this lady right here, okay? Would you agree there is that, instead of the gratitude and increasing sense of hope, would you agree that there is that decreasing sense? Where would she fit? Where would she fit on here? I don't think it takes us very long to realize that she is down in the lower areas. She does have safety. She does have security. But she doesn't have much else. So here's another picture. And I jokingly say with this picture, that man today knows he has a girlfriend, okay? And his heart is full, and they're both smiling. That's probably one of the best caregivers you can imagine. She's taking care of him physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And where is he because of that kind of care? Yeah, he's at the top end of those things. He's fulfilled in those kinds of things. And what a difference. Who's more likely to have the bullying being done to them, okay? Think about those kinds of things too. So, what kinds of things are you providing to give your residents meaning? Meaning in their lives. When you walk through your community next time, when you go back, when you leave this meeting and you walk out of this office or this conference room, or you leave your desk or wherever you're leaving and you walk around the facility, ask yourself, where is that resident on this scattering of needs? What level of needs are being met for them? I'm going to recommend a book to you. It's one of my favorites. I read it about every 5 years or so. Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. An amazing life. Part of it is he survived 4 prisoner POW camps. He's a Jewish psychiatrist. He watched his wife, his parents, his children all die. Okay? And yet he wrote this book afterwards. It's such a good book because it helps us to understand the importance of meaning. Most of us, if we know the why of things, can put up with almost any what of things. Please take a chance to read that book. All right. So let's go look at some interventions. Crucial thinking. All right? Crucial thinking. And we know him as Eddie Albert. He said, in times of life crisis, where wildfires or smoldering stress, or whether there are those things, the first thing I do is go back to basics. And you know, when I think of Eddie Alberts, he's that man from Green Acres, okay? He was happy, he was engaged. You know what else that causes me to believe he really did apply this principle? Is he didn't die till he was 99 years old. He lived a long life. Longer lives tend to be wrapped around things like finding fulfillment, finding engagement, finding purpose, finding meaning. So some possible characteristics of bullies: lacks empathy. Not a whole lot of friends. Maybe they get along with the few, but even those friends are probably a different kind of friend that most of us needs. Wants power and control. It says needs, but it's in quotes. Wants power and control. Struggles with differences, all different kinds of differences. There's that loss of power that we've mentioned before. You know, and the other thing, too, is they tend to have lower self-esteem, and they try to tear others down to build themselves up. And they just feel that power flow to them whenever they're causing somebody else angst. Which intervention works best? That's a dumb question, isn't it? Which is the best intervention? It probably has a whole lot to do with what does the resident need? Okay? It's one resident at a time. That's how we build it. You can't pull something down off a shelf and find some cookie cutter solution. Here's the 6 we'll talk about. These are the 6 kinds of interventions. Now, there'll be 3 institutional interventions, too, that we'll look at. All right, let's define empathy, okay? Because that is one of those kinds of things that you can feel. Now, because this is a 55-minute presentation for me, I don't have time to show one of my favorite videos, but you can go find it and watch it and consider sharing it with your staff in a staff meeting. And it's if you Google Cleveland Clinic and the word empathy, you'll come across this video, all right? Powerful, powerful video, worth the time. Worth the time. Please go find that. So that's 2 things I want you to do. Man's Search for Meaning, Victor Hugo, and go watch the empathy video that was produced by Cleveland Clinic. So let's define it. The ability to understand, and then you see 2 key words, and share the feelings of another. The mere fact that I can understand that I've made you uncomfortable, that might be what I'm trying to do anyway. But it means that you share those feelings and you care about those feelings. Bad news? Bullies often lack this. Good news, it can be learned. You can help them to learn how to have empathy. And modeling's one example. So you have a situation of bullying in the dining room. So what are you going to do with it? You're going to ignore it? You're going to pretend like it'll go away on its own? Or are you going to go talk to that resident? And you pull them to the side, and you begin to talk to them, and you reflect back on them. You may even ask them a question that, what would happen, because you know your granddaughter Julie, she comes and she visits you often. What if someone were to bully Julie the same way you were just bullying Mrs. Smith? How would that affect you? How would that affect Julie? So you start building that kind of a discussion for this person. Now the other one, and this is a little more difficult, and this may take a more trained person, like a social services worker, okay? Somebody with more of this kind of background. You would actually pull the bullied person and the bully into the same room. So clearly it's not going to work for everybody. But it might give them that opportunity to talk. My wife and I have learned that if we can talk about it, whatever it is, together we can come up with solutions. And we've been able to conquer lots and lots of things in the past. And I think bullying might be one of those. Again, you have to make a choice. You have to know your resident. You have to know the bullied person as well to know which one to choose. So the second one, well, an example. Here's an example. A resident couple moves in. They get on for breakfast the first morning, okay? And they try to find a table to sit down to, but nobody will let them sit at their table. And they go and they check all of them. They look at each other, they shake their heads, they droop their shoulders, they pick up their trays, and they walk back to their room. And they never go back to the dining room again. When they were interviewed by this social worker, they had been eating that way for 2 years. No companionship except each other for 2 years. So let's think about empathy and its many forms of application, but also some ideas of how we can kind of encourage empathetic relationships. Take a look at the top one, top left. Couples together, doing things together, having a good time. Sure, this is a staged photo, but you've seen these kinds of relationships, these kinds of teams that support one another. How about the daughter and the mom? What if that daughter lives a little ways off, but you were to have a program in your community whereby you have your department heads, and I'm actually challenging you. It's a third thing I'm challenging you to think about doing, okay? So that your department heads, once a month, call 2 different people, 2 different family members. Because right now, when your phone ID shows up on their phone, what are they thinking? What did they do to mom now? But what if you had a program where you could call that family member and tell them about something good that their mother had done? Whether it's how she was able to eat by herself today, or her performance in therapy. I mean, she was able to walk more than she has since she's been here. She's doing so well. Or maybe it's something as simple as she must have had the magic cards in bingo last night. You should have seen her. You could also set up teas and socials and things like that. That bottom right-hand corner. You could pull some guys together and they could talk about their fishing days. There's other kinds of things that we can do for them. The pets program, having pets come in, because you know what? They haven't seen their cat in months now. Well, how about that 9 o'clock picture? How about the use of technology to encourage empathy, exchanges between family members? You know that one at 6 o'clock? Charlie on the left taught Charlie on the right how to ride the Harley. Yeah, that's father and son. And those are good conversations to have. Staff should know about those things too, so they can ask about those kinds of things. And then just being together. Create social events for them. We'll talk about one here in a little bit. But that's not all. Let's think about when empathy is no longer important. All right? All right, she's begun to decline a little bit. Does it still matter? Yes. Declined even more. Slowing down. Maybe not engaged as well. You know, maybe suffering from some memory loss. How about in hospice? At each of those points, we still know that empathy matters. But it can't just matter to the folks on the phone. It has to matter to your frontline staff as well, so help them with that. And here's some ways we can help people to learn, all right? And scan down through it. There was actually 22 different ideas. I had to boil it down. These are the ones that stood out the most for me. Scan down through them. We're not going to talk through them, okay? Except for the last one. Have you ever apologized and not really meant it? Work with people when they apologize too, so that there's more meaning in it, because that's how you build friendships. Okay, number 2, help them expand to social networks. And we can do that one-on-one, or we can do that in larger groups. You know what? Sometimes bullies don't care that they don't have a lot of friends. In fact, you'll even hear, they don't like me anyway. But it can be encouraged. More importantly, it can be facilitated. And I think of this as sort of being that social Cupid. All right? So what do we got here? Well, you know what? I used to watch this program. Some of you won't even know it. It was Mike Nelson's Sea Hunt. And I'll bet you there's somebody else in that facility that used to watch that same, and you can still get it. I know you can still get it. I've actually kind of watched it. It's back from when I would get home from school. My it was back when I was like 9th grade, 8th grade. But I was raised on a farm, and I had to hurry up, go do my chores, and then I could come watch Sea Hunt. I would still want to watch that. Find somebody else that wants to do some of those kinds of things. Again, that's knowing resident likes and desires, all right? And we'll talk about 4 of those kinds of programs that I've seen very well effective. So that would be the one-on-ones. But, of course, you can have, there's something we don't even do anymore. I never have, and it's natting. It's a form of knitting, but it's a completely different form. And your residents, there are those of your residents who know how to do it. And you could reach out, go down to your local store where they're selling all of those kinds of knitting supplies and in sewing supplies and those kinds of stores. You'll find somebody in there, and you might talk to them and find out if there's somebody willing to come in and teach a class and those kinds of things. Find out what your residents like and reach out and try to find somebody that will come in and provide that kind of thing. Number 3, setting limits on bullying behaviors. Important. Setting limits. But it isn't you knowing where those limits are. It's helping the residents to know where they are. In fact, these kinds of conversations can be brought up even during touring families so that they understand how important the safety and the safety for the residents is how important that is to you. All right, reality check. Bullying behaviors aren't acceptable. That's got to be one of your policies. That's got to be one of your procedures. And it's got to be procedures. That's got to be one of those things that you repeat often. But it can be encouraged. And if you look at this, you can see I've got policies and procedures in there. I mean, I walked into a building decades ago. I got there a little early. The administrator was out there. It was in Palm Springs, California. The administrator was out touring the building, so they asked me to go in and wait. And when I looked behind the desk, there was one of those ceiling-to-floor bookcases that was full of 3-ring binders of policies and procedures. All right? There were 72 binders on there that administrator and the community staff were responsible for. Think about it. What are your important policies? Yes, it's going to be financial. It's going to be admissions. It's going to be care. So many of them. Make sure that we got policies and procedures to help the staff know what to do in bullying situations too. And then you can see the bottom line. Communicate, communicate, communicate. An example, all right, setting limits. We have a resident who's lived by themselves for a while in a room. Now you admit a new resident. Well, that resident living by herself, she's afraid of the dark. So what had she started to do? She slept with the light on. The new resident, her new roommate, can't stand the light on. Has to have as much dark as possible. We're going to have to work with these two. We're going to have to create a balance between these two. And maybe we can do that with some underbed lighting. Maybe we can do that with some thicker privacy curtains. Those kinds of activities and those kinds of approaches to that too. Okay? So setting the limits, we're going to have to help create an environment where we can limit those impacts as well. Another one is, for instance, I'm sitting there and I'm talking to my son Michael. Now Michael's not going to call very often. He calls this day and we're talking and we're conversing, and I love talking to my son Michael. And so you come up to me because there's a medication that you need to pass. There's a medication I need to take. And so I just hold my hand up and I'm trying to shoo you away and say, just stand there and wait. Let me finish my conversation. What are you going to do with that one? I'm trying to command you what to do. And that's not going to work for the other residents. So in this instance, you would just let me know quietly. I'll come back when I'm done with the other residents. So again, we've set the limit. The resident can have their phone call, and then I can give the care in a timely fashion to the other residents, but they know that I'll come back and I'll take care of them. Number 4, appropriate outlets to vent frustrations. Because you know what? There's times that I don't like other people. There's something about them I don't care for. Okay? Well, why don't you just tell me it's okay? It won't bother you. It won't bother you. Question 2, legitimate feelings. These are legitimate feelings, and we can't just explain them away. True or false? Hey, quite honestly, it's true. We can't just scoot them away. All right, you ready for a picture? I want you to look up here. You ready? That's my grandson, Noah. Now lives in Texas. This is in Florida. That's a king snake. He caught it himself. Trust me, his daddy knows the snakes, and so does Noah. Most people cringe at even the thought of this thing. Okay? Not Noah. And I actually have another picture of his little brother, Simon. His snake is a lot smaller, and it's a different day, but they're good with snakes. How many of your residents would be? How many of you are? How many of you pulled back from that? And if that one didn't get you, how about that one? All right? Now, I'm going to tell you that both that snake and that spider are good for us. They're environmental benefits to us. So you don't have to be afraid of them. How many of you are any less bugged by that snake or that spider just because I tell you something? It has to go beyond that. So now we're back to that 4th intervention about the frustrations and about my objection to you. I don't like you, okay? I don't like you because. Why because? I already named some of those off. It doesn't matter. There's such a long list of why we can't. So we need to work with them. We need to give them some opportunities, and it's going to take some one-on-one time most often. All right, skin number 1, work from where the resident's view is. You can't work from the resident's view is until you what? You know the resident's view. If you're going to carry on these kinds of conversation, you're going to develop what I think of as a relationship of trust, and it takes some time. And if you look at number 3, it builds to that. And you see that acronym? WAIT, W-A-I-T, why am I talking? Listen to your residents. Listen to what they're telling you. Listen to what they used to like. Listen to how they used to live, what was important to them. Start knowing those kinds of things, and you can help them with today's frustrations. It isn't because you're going to tell them what to do. You're going to help guide them to those things. And at times, you'll need to pull the social worker in. You're going to need more assistance with those kinds of things, especially for more violent behaviors. Number 5, alternate ways to put bullies in control. One of them is I asked you about it earlier. What if you have this welcoming committee? And what if you have an event where you're going to have family members come in? Can you give the residents, maybe they can help put the cookies out on the tray. Maybe they can help set up the refreshment table. Maybe there's some of those kinds of things that they can do. You know, there's even times with some residents that you could have them fill in invitations to family members and let them participate that way. Not everybody wants to feel in control, but everybody wants to be in control of something most often. My father-in-law, he would say, I don't want to be in control of anything. And yet when you came into his home, he was clearly, he took such good care of his home. He cooked many of the meals because his wife worked. And he was in charge of many things. So he was only certain things he wanted to be in charge of, though. So think about it, okay? Think about it. When we talk about alternate controls, make sure that they're looking at their feelings and how they're engaging with other people, because you can be engaged without being bossy, but give them things to do. Give them create that leadership role if you can somehow. But also, when you respond to them, when you react to them, make sure that the way you deal with them is positive. The last one, okay? It's positive communications, how you talk to them. But it's not just how you talk to them, it's how they talk to other people. And this one is probably one of the slower ones, because you're going to have to teach them something that can be harder for us to do, okay? Is there a difference between being assertive and being aggressive? There is. They may not realize that, but there is. Can you teach them how to be assertive without being aggressive? You can, okay? An example. Somebody's sitting in my chair, and I walk up to them, and I begin to yell at them, and I begin to talk about them. What if instead of talking about them, how, you know that's my chair, get out of my chair, I don't like you, get out, move, you know I'm supposed to sit there, okay? Teach them to use I statements, all right? Because the reality is with I statements, you're going to teach that resident to talk about, I really need to talk to you about that chair. You and I have talked about this together, and I've shared with you that if you sit here at lunchtime, then can I sit here at dinner time? That would help me a lot. So begin to teach them to talk about their feelings and to communicate based on their feelings as opposed to the attack on somebody else. I had a resident that I came to know. She was in a large CCRC. At one point, she was over on the skilled side, and that's where she ended up being admitted to. And she was difficult enough, and this is an after picture. This isn't a before picture. She was difficult enough in her behaviors that her family, who lived reasonably close to the community, didn't even come when she was admitted. She was hard on the staff. She ended up in the situation where she would only get out of bed for a couple of reasons. One was to go smoke. One was for bowel and bladder. And the third one was there was a recumbent bike that she liked to use once a day. For some reason, she lost the ability to use that bike. It was no longer there. So she became even more withdrawn. She became even more harsh on the staff. So one day, apparently she forgets that she can't use the bike anymore. But she calls the staff and says, put me in my wheelchair. I'm going to go use the bike. And the staff member helped her in her wheelchair and just let it go. She got down to the area where the space, where the recumbent bike used to be, and instead of the recumbent bike being there, there's a music therapy program going on. And the therapist, sees Karen come in, knows her story. And she says, Karen, come join with us. And Karen responded, I don't do things like that. And so the therapist said, that's okay. Just stay there and just watch a little bit. Well, the therapist goes back to working with the other residents with her back to Karen. And she begins to realize from looks on the residents' faces and also little noises from behind her that Karen is making, that Karen's participating. Karen is participating in these events. So the therapist picks up 2 1-pound little dumbbells and hands them over to Karen and said, here, use these. Well, for whatever reason, that little engagement with Karen changed her whole demeanor towards the program, towards the residents, towards the staff, and she began to come out of this. So Karen gets to the point. She begins to use she was able to use the recumbent bike again. She begins to use that bike 6 times a day for 25 minutes a day. None of us can keep up with that. Oh, by the way, she gets out of the wheelchair. She's now walking. She still smokes. She still smokes after each time that she uses her recumbent bike. But so what? How many of us exercise in that dedicated a fashion? So what changed? What changed with Karen? Well, it was that staff engaging with her. So I want to continue this train of thoughts about staff and resident stories. So somebody comes in and hangs this picture up. Okay? In my mind, that's kind of an interesting picture. Where did it come from? What's going on? Who can you talk to? Go talk to the resident. Find out what it is. Learn about it. What are you going to do with that knowledge then? 4 programs that I've seen. Okay, simple pleasures. The community talks to the resident and gathers these simple pleasures for them. And they begin to realize that, you know what? Everybody needs to know these. So they write them down and they make them available to the rest of the staff. That's one way of doing this. Then there's video interviews that they would do with the resident. Again, pulling out from them, what are they interested in? How many cubes of sugar do they want in their tea? All of those kinds of questions. And the rest of the staff gets to watch these videos in the break room. But then there's also room signs. And we've used lots of room signs over the years. Okay? But these are going to be informative room signs. They may even be changed out a little bit as we begin to see it. Now, I worked with a facility recently, and they use the eye care plans. And I know that the eye care plans take a lot, but there's a principle there that I thought was really, really revealing, okay? And in their program, they make sure that all the departments know what the resident goals are for going home, for participation, for happiness, things that they don't want to have. They don't want to have crying spells, those kinds of things. So what are you doing now to help the staff know the resident stories? That can go a long way to helping on these things. Okay, 2 slides with organizational interventions. Take a look at your community rules. Do you have a code of conduct? It can be concise, it can be brief, but it should be specific about acceptable behaviors. And you should start the communication of these early, really, when you're touring the facilities for the first time. Make sure that in resident councils it's talked about. Make sure that if you've got some sort of an electronic bulletin board, that at times you mention positive stories that helped other people to feel their opportunity to help other residents, to be more happy, to be more participant. But it'll also help the staff to become more engaged with what they can do to help both each other, but also to help the residents too. And then be consistent, both in your application, both in how you respond to things, but also in your training. And then when we think about other resources, this is the second slide with interventions. Take a look down through there. Social worker, ombudsman, psychologist. We could start right at the top with the family, though. Okay, with the responsible party. Make sure that they're pulled into these conversations too. All right, who's your greatest, most powerful source of strength? Where's the most important toolbox that you have? We're going to show you a video.
I was asked 5 years ago to speak to 3,000 employees of a large grocery store chain, and they brought everybody. After I'd spoken, I always give my home phone number to every audience. I had a young man who called me, and he told me his name was Johnny, that he was a bagger in one of the stores, and he was a person of Down syndrome. He said, "Barbara, I liked what you said." And he said he went home that night and he asked his dad to help him with the computer. And he said we set the computer up into 3 columns. And he said from that night on, every night that he goes home, he finds a thought for the day. And he said, if I can't find one I like, I think one up. Then he and his dad type it 6 times on a page. He prints out 50 pages every single night, cuts them out, signs his name on the back. And the next day, for every person's groceries he bags, he puts a thought for the day in the bag. Now, about a month later, the store manager called me. He said, "Barbara, I want to tell you what happened this morning." He said, "When I went out on the floor about 9:30 this morning, the line at Johnny's checkout was 3 times longer than any other line." He said, "I went ballistic. I was yelling, 'Get more people out there, get more lanes open.'" And he said, the customer said, no, we want to be in Johnny's lane. We want the thought for the day." So who do you think is the most important person in that whole store. He said, one woman came up and said, I only used to shop once a week, but now I come in every time I go by because I want the thought for the day. He said, 3 months later, the store manager called me back again, and he said, Barbara, you and Johnny have transformed our store. He said, now in the floral department, when they have a broken off flower or an unused corsage, we used to just throw them away. He said, now they go out on the floor and they find an elderly woman or a little girl, and they pin it on them. He said, one of our meat packers loves Snoopy, so we ordered 50,000 Snoopy stickers, and every time he packages a piece of meat, his meat gets a Snoopy sticker on it. Now, I said, I don't know about dog stickers on meat. But he said, we are having so much fun, and our customers are having so much fun. And folks, that's a true leader. And if he can do it, there is no reason why every one of us in this room and out there in our audiences can't do it. Thank you. God bless.
I like that video. I've used it often. I think it teaches some great principles. It reminds us of things that I'm sure you apply, things that perhaps you've done in the past, and maybe it's even worth Googling for that video. You can find it out there, Johnny the Bagger, and you could use that one with staff as well. So we've talked about a lot of interventions, both individual as well as we had a few institutional interventions. We talked about some of the definitions and some of the principles around bullying. I think engagement and knowing resident stories can be some of the most important parts and pieces. I would hope this was helpful to you. And with that, Robin?
Thank you so much for the valuable information, Ray. Now, I would like to introduce Jeanna Swiatkowski, our senior design consultant here at Direct Supply. Passionate about senior living design, Jeanna works with clients to discover the best solutions for residents, staff, and communities in common instances of furniture selection and placement, as well as design components that can reduce instances of agitation and bullying. And now, please welcome Jeanna.
Thank you, Robin. Today I want to talk through how you can use space planning in order to reduce agitation and potential bullying situations. I have two areas that I would like to focus on today. I would like to talk about a dining room situation as well as a common lounge space. So let's start out with the dining room layout. So here we have a typical dining room situation layout that you would normally see. You've got some rectangular tables, you have some square tables, and you even have some round tables in here. So what could potentially be wrong with this? Well, nothing really, as long as you know what to look for and how to mitigate any issues that might happen. So first, let's take a look at this round table over here. We have a round table that is 60 inches in diameter, which is a typical length or diameter that you're going to see for a table that's going to house 6 people sitting in it. Well, how often do we actually see a 60-inch table in our dining rooms? Typically, we're going to see either a 36-inch or a 42-inch round table. So here we have a typical 42-inch round table, and as you can see, we have 3 chairs comfortably seated around the table. Each person that's going to be sitting there will have plenty of room for any of their glassware, dishware, their silverware, condiments, and as you can see, this lovely centerpiece in the middle, which does offer a little bit of home touch to the space. We have plenty of room. We don't have to worry about anybody not having enough space for dining, and we don't have to worry about anybody leaning or any agitation typically in this type of a situation. Let's move on to what it looks like with 4 people. I'm sure you've all seen this type of a seating arrangement also. People are sitting across from each other, they have enough space still, and there's still room for that lovely centerpiece in the middle. Now let's look at what happens when we have a new friend that maybe wants to join, or a new resident. Now we've pulled up a 5th chair onto this 42-inch table. Now we're really starting to encroach on each other's space. So we don't have room for everybody to sit at the table. They don't have the appropriate space for all of their glassware, their dishware, the condiments. But we do have room for that lovely centerpiece still, because that's typically something that's going to be important for that home-like touch and for people to still feel in control and aware of their situations. Now, how often have you seen this happen? I've been in plenty of communities and facilities where I have seen people that want to just gather around together, pull up that extra sixth chair, and have their coffee clutch, have their discussion about the morning news, just talk about what's going on, who won at bingo the night before. Is this really going to be a good situation for them? There's not going to be enough room. They're going to be trying to talk to people. You can't see each other. You can't see the person that's sitting next to you very well. That can cause agitation. If you can't see the other person sitting next to you when you're talking, sometimes you can't hear very well and you rely on lip reading. So you're not able to see that person, and that will cause an agitation as well. How often do you actually see this happening? Believe it or not, this can happen, but with a better situation or a better solution, and we'll go over that in a little bit. Now I'd like to look at the actual rectangular table that we have here. It seemingly looks like a great option because you have 6 people comfortably placed around the table here. You have plenty of room on either side, but one thing we're not thinking about is, what's the size of the chairs that we're putting at the table? Will it have enough room if we're sitting side by side with somebody? So let's take a look at this table and chairs. Here we have a rectangular table. You can see it looks like there's plenty of room between the 2 chairs here, but these chairs are actually quite large. They're butting up against the edges of the table. This is a 4-legged table that has an apron, so people are not going to be able to scoot under the table as well as if it was a regular pedestal table. But it does provide that home-like family gathering type situation that people like to be able to sit, converse, and feel at home with. So what happens when you get 2 people that are bunched up next to each other? Well, this is what happens. Somebody's leaning in, and all of a sudden you see pushing, you see shoving, and it turns into an agitated and sometimes a bullying situation. Yes, that's me sitting there. If I'm sitting there and I'm the one that has somebody encroaching in on me, and this happens day after day, meal after meal, I'm going to start to think that they've got something against me, and I'm really going to lash out at them. Well, I could still have this situation again with a better solution with either smaller chairs or one other thing we'll talk about in a moment. Now, let's look at the fact that what's really one of the best situations that we would be able to have in space planning. 42-inch square tables are going to offer some of the best both flexibility and space capacity for the residents. As you can see, at each table, each person has their own chair. They also have their own section that they're going to have all of their glassware, dishware, their meal. They can enjoy the dining experience. You can see the person across from you, and you can also create different types of seating situations. So let's look. Here's the first situation where we've got not good flow walking through especially when you get over by the serving area over here, not good flow for staff and residents to get through. That's going to be another agitation. If they can't get through and somebody's bumping their chair, they're going to get agitated, and they're going to think that they're being targeted at that point in time. So we have this initial situation, and then we have this, where we've got enough movement between the tables and chairs, nobody is going to get bumped into, and you've got easy access for people to look at each other. Another great option with this is, if you want to offer that family style seating arrangements, put 2 of the tables together. Then you have plenty of room. You still have enough space for each person, and yes, you have space for that lovely centerpiece still. Let's move on to the common area layouts. So here we have a typical common area space plan where you've got a sofa and 4 different types of lounge chairs. And then we have some activity space over here. We're going to really hone in on what does that common area look like. How often do you have a sofa in space planned in from a design and you think, nobody's going to be sitting in that middle seat here. What I'm going to do is let's just get a love seat instead. Love seat seems like a great option. However, There's Ray and I sitting on that lovely love seat. We don't have enough room. I'm encroaching in on Ray's space, and look at that look of despair on his face. He's not happy either. Who's controlling the situation here? Me. Not intending to. As you can see, we've got pillows on here. It's moving us closer together. I'm leaning. How often do you have a resident that maybe doesn't have great core strength and isn't able to sit up well and starts to lean in? Well, that's going to cause agitation or some sort of loss of control to the other person. They don't know why that person's not sitting up straight and they're leaning in. So they're going to think, Ray's going to think at this point in time, Jeanna, what are you doing? Why are you leaning into me? So he's going to get agitated, and then we're going to have issues. So rather than having a love seat like this, really the option of having a sofa is a little bit better. Here Ray is having a wonderful conversation with one of the other residents, Jerry, in the community, and they're having a great conversation. You see that they have plenty of space here. There's room between them. They can talk to each other with ease. You can tell Ray knows something's coming up, though. And sure enough, here I am, smack dab in the middle. I have just invited myself right in the middle of their conversation. Now let's look back at what it looks like without me there or without a resident in there. They have plenty of space. They can see each other. There's not an issue of anybody coming in and inhibiting them. And then you have somebody that sits in the middle. And how often does that bully come and sit down and want to control the situation? Ray, we're friends. Why are you talking to this other person? And it's easy for me to come and sit down with that center space open because I feel that I have the control to come and sit down right in between my friend Ray and I. I don't think he should be talking to somebody else. He should be talking to me. Now look, Ray has to look around me to try and to continue his conversation with Jerry. Not good for anybody. I think it is because I'm in the middle of Ray's conversation, but Ray's agitated. Now he has to lean forward and try and talk with Jerry. So what's a great option? When it comes to a sofa, potentially look at having 2 cushions rather than 3 cushions. You have that presumed space identification where 2 people are going to sit on the larger sofa. Nobody wants to sit in the middle when you're straddling both the cushions there. It's not comfortable. It's harder for somebody to sit there. And it's going to be easier for Ray and Jerry to have a conversation. What's another great option to look at? Let's take a look at those lounge chairs. So you have lounge chairs. We have 2 different types here. You can either have them sitting right next to each other, so you have a great conversational layout, or here you can see Ray and I having a nice conversation. We're both in chairs that are visually, we can see each other. Nobody is higher than another. We're not going to feel like anybody is lording over each other. We can have a great conversation. We have a little bit of space with this end table between us, and we're going to mend our differences and be happy once again. So there's a lot of things that you can do just simply by looking at what do you have and how do you situate your furniture in order to reduce agitation and potentially a bullying situation. It's really important to make sure that you look at that. And if you're ever looking for, I'm going to also encourage people and challenge you, go out into your community and see how many instances that I've pointed out really are happening right now. And what differences can you make with just moving furniture around to help make sure that nobody is feeling agitated or creating a situation where somebody's going to be upset. If you are looking at new furniture or need design help or anything like that, please always feel free to reach out to Direct Supply at directsupply.com or directsupply.com/impressions for any design needs that we can help you out with. And then we can help you look at these situations and make sure that you're not creating any bullying situations in your community. Robin, are there any questions?
We do have one question, and I think this is more for Ray. So I'm going to bring you back in here, Ray. What's the best way to approach a bully to diffuse a bullying situation?
It really depends on the situation because there are times the best thing you can do is to back away, make sure that others are safe, but take the pressure off of the bully, give them a few minutes to calm down, maybe even give them more time to calm down. But you're going to need to figure out what the triggers were, too. And then you can just, at the appropriate time, you can reapproach them. Perhaps perhaps when they're sitting down, you could come up close to them, but not that close, and don't be standing lording over them, okay? So those are a couple of ideas for doing it. It might even be you just have to wait till the following day, though. It's going to depend.
All right, great. Well, thank you, Ray, and thank you, Jeanna. And thank you all for attending today. We really appreciate it. For more information on our upcoming webinars or to view past webinar videos, please visit directsupply.com/webinars. Thanks again for attending.